So hi there, I'm going to go over the framework for your next project, which I will give you in this project, Abstract Art GUI. So there are 7 classes here. These three are related to presenting the user interface and taking what the user chooses from the user interface and passing it along to these classes, which in turn work with square objects that are placed into the canvas class. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's take a look. So we'll make a new ArtMaker object, and this actually creates this this user interface with buttons, which is pretty cool. And what happens, and you can look at user interface inside of this. You don't need to, but you can if you want. What happens in there is when the user clicks on one of these buttons, this class picks up that click and looks at what the name of the button is and passes that name over to an object of ArtEngine. And then ArtEngine can, with a bunch of if statements, look at the name. So is the name erase all? Is the name 1? Is the name 1 modified, etc. And depending upon what it finds, it can call the appropriate methods either in ColorX or vertical bars or in Canvas. Okay. The only time it calls Canvas directly is when you do erase all, and that erases all of the square objects that these guys have added to Canvas. So let's actually run this. So when I click 1, I get a bunch of randomly sized rectangles that are randomly colored, that are randomly placed. Okay? And what I did for 1 modified, and you can do different things for your modified, mostly those are going to be based upon the methods available to you in Square, right? So one of the methods available in Square is to move horizontal. So all of these square objects, which are stored in an ArrayList, I want to move them over to the right a little bit. So I click on 1 modified, and off they go to the right. Right? Every time I click, what's happening is I'm clicking, this is picking up the click, it's sending 1 modified here as what the name of the button that was clicked on. There's an if statement here that says, hey, when I get 1 modified, call ColorX and call a method in ColorX that goes through the array list of these square objects and tells each one of them, hey, move over. Each one of those square objects it calls the move right method, move horizontal method in Square, and they all get, one at a time, they get moved over a bit. Okay, so this is actually going through a loop and moving a bunch of things to the right. I can add more, and now the array list has more objects, but I can again go through and say, hey, all you objects in the array list, you square objects in the array list, move over, move to the right. Okay? I can keep doing that all I want. I can make lots of these. I can tell all of them to move to the right. You notice as I add more, it goes slower, right? Because it has to move hundreds of objects, square objects, to the right now. Okay? If I want to get rid of them all, I just hit erase all, and it gets rid of them all. I did one other class. That was ColorX we were looking at, vertical bars. If I click 2, again, what happens? I click 2, this picks up that the button 2 is pressed on, so it sends the string 2 to ArtEngine. ArtEngine has an if statement that says if 2 is pressed on, call vertical bars, a method in vertical bars. Okay? And let's see what that does. So that makes a bunch of red vertical bars. And I did the same thing on modified here. So what this does is those vertical bars are just long stretched out squares, right, or rectangles, they're not squares, but long rectangles stored in an array list. Each of these is referenced in an array list. I do two modified, and oh look, they move off to the right. And I can make more and move them off to the right and more, and so on. And I can add some of these guys and move those off to the right a bit and add some more, whatever. Okay, and then erase them all. So what you have to do in this, for this program, is to make 6 additional classes that put different types of rectangles on the screen by first putting, adding a bunch of rectangles of various types to an array list, and then having a method that will modify those using the methods that are available in the square class. Because remember, you're creating an array list of, well, let's look. Right? So here I'm going to let you figure this out. Well, with one explanation, I'm going to let you figure this out. Because there's one thing here that's a little different. Before we do that, let's just look at the heart of this, right? What this is doing is it's a loop from 0 to max. Max is a constant defined here, right? That's the way you define a constant. It's a little, just verbose, but that's the way Java does it. Private, static, final, int, max. So what that means is that max cannot change within the code of the class. It's constant. So, if I want to go, this is going to create 50 rectangle objects. I modified square and canvas so that you can make objects of color rainbow, right? Instead of like red, blue, gray. If you do rainbow when you make your object, those two classes, square and canvas, will automatically generate a randomly colored. I'm going to pause. So sorry about that. So if you use the rainbow here as the color, just will create randomly colored rectangles, squares. Okay? So just a few things here. The random class is a class you can import with import java.util.random, and here we say R is going to be the name of a random object, and then inside the constructor we actually make a new random object called R, and then if you do r.nextInt followed by a value in the parentheses, the parameter value, you'll just generate a random integer between 0 and whatever that value is. So in this case, width is 50 up here. So this will generate a number between 0 and 49. And so that's the width of the rectangle it's created, and it will be something between 0 and 49. And this is the height of the rectangle. And that will be between 0 and 50. Again, actually between 0 and 49, one less than that, and so on. Okay, so you can play with these to get a sense of how those work. At the end here, there are 4 inputs here when you make a new square, right? And so it's width, height, x and y of the top left corner. Width of the rectangle, height of the rectangle, top left corner, and how far over from the left. The top left corner is how far down from the top left corner is. Okay, so yeah, let's just look at one last thing in here, Art Engine. Okay, so Art Engine. You're going to have to modify Art Engine as you create new classes of your own for color, for your art. And notice I have two fields here, or instant variables. Instant variables and fields are exactly the same thing, just different names for the same thing. So I have a color rex field and a vertical bars field, right, to hold references to these guys. And then it's always the two-step process in the constructor for Art Engine. Actually make a color rex object, store a reference to it in a color rex, make a vertical bars object, and store a reference to it in a vertical bars. So here's another thing you're going to need to modify. As you make your 6 classes, you don't need to make 6 classes. You just need to make 3 classes, 3 additional classes. Each of those classes will have a method for creating, adding square or rectangles to an array list, and a method for modifying those squares that are stored within the array list. Okay, so you just need to add 3 classes. So as you add those 3 classes, you're going to want to add whatever your name of the class is, or the object is, so like a color bars.delete objects, and a vertical bars.delete objects. And what that does is it just removes all the, let me show you that. It's a very short method. Bars is the name of the array list. It just clears, this is a method of the ArrayList class. It just clears out all it empties the array list. So whatever squares or rectangles you added to it are no longer there, right? And you want to do that whenever the user presses on the Erase All button. Okay, so when you actually write your own versions, when you add your 3 classes, you can copy the code from here and make modifications to it, right? And you can copy the code from vertical bars and make modifications to it. I'd like you to be as creative as possible, right? And change almost everything once you've copied it in terms of the sizes and the numbers and all that stuff. But you can use these as your templates to do those. So back to Art Engine, we're almost done. So you're going to need to add those as you add the objects up here in the constructor. You're going to need to add calls to their delete objects methods, and then you'll need to add if statements that will match these if statements. So let's say you added a new class called like horizontal bars, and you made up here a object called a horizontal bars. Then what you'd do down here is you'd say if button name dot equals 3 a horizontal bars dot add square objects, right? And then you'd add if button name dot equals 3 space modified, then you'd call a horizontal bars dot move square objects, and that would be however you're moving those objects based upon the methods that are available to you in Square, or some other creative way you discover to move them. Okay? Last thing here, right? Notice we're not using equals equals. We don't say if button name equals 1. We use dot equals. That's because when you're comparing one string object to another string, you have to do dot equals to compare, because this is strings are objects. They're not primitives like integers or doubles or booleans. They're complex objects, and you have to call the method of the string class called equals to say, hey, so this is a string, button name is a string that's passed in from user interface, depending upon the button that was pressed. And it says, okay, if that string, button name, dot equals the string 1, then do this, right? You cannot say if button name equals 1. That's just the way you have to compare. When you're comparing for equality, when you're comparing two objects, not primitives, to see if they're equal, you have to call the equals method of the objects. And strings have an equals method that you can just call just like that. Okay? So this should get you started. If you have questions, let me know. Thanks.